You're graduating soon, right?
Yep, I'll be walking in a month exactly now on May 2nd.
Really?
It's
I feel
gonna
like that's
be,
early.
yeah, they usually have it the second or third week of May, but I think since they had some shifts in the winter semester, they brought it from 5 weeks down to 4 weeks, that everything got moved back or up a week. And so I'll be walking with the Bachelor's of Science Cannabis Business, Bachelor's of Science Cannabis Chemistry, and then minors in biology and biochemistry. But it has been a journey.
What is the first thing that you're gonna do, like, when you're like, okay, I'm graduated, it's done? Like, do you have anything planned? Like, what's the first thing that you're excited to just, like, be able to finally do?
I think that I've always been a little bit very positive about our program, so I think being able to speak a little bit more honestly about my experience with, we launched votes of no confidence in our president, provost, and board of trustees, and I've kind of tried to mitigate that because I wasn't sure how we would look back on the programs, but we're going from 29 students down to a dozen in the program as well, so
Oh,
it's shrunk a lot. There's only 1,200 students actually at LSSU, which, that's a whole issue in and of itself. But I think they're on the come up. I'm hoping that the program is able to kind of continue and move forward. But it's, I think, speaking a little bit more openly about my thoughts and experience because previous students have had backlash. And yeah, I'm wondering, what, you're graduated already, right?
yeah, I graduated with my master's last May.
Okay. Well, congratulations. Was your master's in cannabis, or what was the degree specifically in?
It was in neuroscience. So I did my master's in neuroscience, but my laboratory work, all of that was having to do with cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. And I was in a very similar boat as you when you say that you wanted to wait until after you graduated to, like, maybe share some things about the program. That was the story of my life for my time during grad school. I definitely had to hold some thoughts back until I was done with that institution. And now that I'm far enough from it, I let loose about it. And I think that's constructive. I think that, like, when you're considering especially grad school, you kind of have to be open about, like, the culture and environment at certain schools for the sake of future students.
Yeah. And for the grad school aspect of it, being more honest about, so are you saying like you felt comfortable being honest to the grad school, or like once you were out of undergrad or in moving on to the next steps, you felt more like comfortable in the process of transition? Does
A
that make
little bit
sense?
of, yeah, it was a little bit of both. I definitely had more confidence to say to faculty some of the opinions that I had about things that were happening at the institution. Once I had actually had my hands on my degree, I'm like, okay, nobody can get in the way of this now that I have it.
Yep.
And also, just in the sense of, people would ask me all the time, oh, I'm considering this program at the school that you went to. What did you think about it? And
Yep.
you got to be honest, there's programs that are different, they have different qualities with them. And especially now that I'm starting my PhD at University of South Florida, you learn very, yeah, I'm so excited, but
Yeah.
you
Congrats, by the way.
learn thank you, you learn very quickly talking to students at different institutions how night and day some of these programs can be, just even in the culture of, like, what's acceptable, I mean, in grad school, especially, like, the social structure of how things go is a huge part of your education. You wouldn't like to think so, but it's true.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think I've had a really difficult time through undergrad trying to balance that because we've done a lot of advocacy work within the club trying to advocate for the programs and the students within the degree programs in terms of their ability just to like throw events. But being in academic, like we had professors pull us into the faculty union meeting to talk about like some of the discrimination we faced. So I have not been very open about that on social media at all, or like just kind of in general, because I wanted to support the programs as much as they could, and I wanted to like help the school still retain and recruit students. But when we created a marketing promo video with the founder of Raw Rolling Papers, Josh Kesselman, at MJ BizCon this last year, and I tried to get our university to repost it because Josh posted it on the main Raw page, and then the way that I went about that may have not been the most professional, but it was trying to get attention, and I got the wrong type of attention to the point where now I'm potentially facing a harassment complaint from the marketing department because I tried to get them to market our programs too much, which is absurd in my opinion, but
What?
it's crazy because I had DM'd them on Instagram the video that Raw reposted and was like, out of love, I'm gonna message you every hour until I see it reposted. And so every hour I was messaging, and I actually didn't know that on Instagram DMs, when you record the voice message, as soon as you let go, it sends, and you can't unsend it.
It
So
does.
I did that once, and I didn't say anything bad. I actually started singing and was like, don't
No,
you forget about me, and like made a remix of that trying to say like we're trying to promote the programs and the university, and oh God, it was so I apologize
I
for that.
love that. I love that so much. I'm stealing that from you.
We tried, but so I sent an email to everyone in marketing that day, in addition to my DMs saying like this is unacceptable. A student shouldn't have to like hope, beg, and pray that something is getting reposted when we're being requested to make this content, and that like they know we're attending the conference. So the fact that they weren't active in promoting us being there was really frustrating. But then they thanked me for my outreach efforts, and so I like that was one incident. And then the second incident was recently we had reposted one of our recent graduates, Alex Ekman, won the El Soli Award at Cannes ACS's conference for his research on cartridge degradation in CBD vapes. And so because they had reposted it, I just briefly slid up on their story and was like, could you create some original content and not just repost everything that we post? Like maybe this awesome video that we did with the Raw founder. I don't know if you'd have that. Just kidding. I know you do. But please don't use targeted AI, and make some original content. And then immediately after that, they had went to our club advisor and said like that they were considering filing the harassment complaint. So I would beg to differ that it's not actually harassment. It's just them being a little self-conscious in the promotion. But navigating that during the last semester of senior year has been difficult, to say the least.
Dude,
But
that's not harassment. You're doing karaoke in their DMs to have to get their attention.
it was absurd that I had to sing to try and get their attention in the DMs. And I'm wondering, with your experience in undergrad and in partial of the masters, have you had any crazy experiences like that in terms of trying to promote your degree programs and path, or even just promoting the research that you're doing?
I have had a lot of that. Not as much with the programs. I was never a huge advocate for trying to get people into my programs, only probably because it's not as specific as like what you are doing. I've just been in neuroscience or psychology based programs, but I have had incidents, especially in undergrad, where there was an issue because I was doing cannabis research, and they felt at the institution that my work wouldn't have been suitable for undergraduate research day or neuroscience research day because it fell under the Department of Psychiatry and the Department of Neuroscience, and because it had a lot to do with drugs. But that's research that we're doing at the university. So there was a time, I guess this also may fall under a little bit of harassment. Maybe mine seems a little bit more extreme, where the Office for Neuroscience was not responding to my emails regarding confirmation about me being able to present my work. So I emailed them and I said, I see these are the hours that your office is open. I'm just going to be there every day at 9 a.m. before your door opens, and you can just expect me there. And finally, when I get to speak to somebody, I will stop showing up. That lasted about 5 days until somebody finally acknowledged me that I was there waiting for them to open their office and had a conversation with me about it. But again, larger institution. Syracuse was a huge school, and it seemed more like that my message was kind of getting lost in translation to a few of the people. So, but sometimes I think that's persistence. I don't think what we have done in our respective situations is harassment. I think it's being persistent. And a message that I always say is, I'm a student at your university. You have taught me to be persistent, to be resilient, to ask for what I want and utilize these resources. That's what I'm doing. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that there's frustration expressed with that persistence, it's like, we're training ourselves to be leaders in one of the most controversial fields right now. And specifically, we're utilizing the resources that these universities have to leverage their reach too. And whether it be through the research that you do getting published or through the way that we try and market our programs here, it's just trying to get people to know more. And I think that's kind of what we're doing here now, is trying to help people know more and keep continuing providing education through an unbiased and evidence-based lens, where we'll be having guests on over the next couple of weeks and months and trying to give as much information out as we can. But with that being said, what would you like people to know more about you?
I think it's important, especially because this is the first episode. We've been going a little bit back and forth about some background on us, but I think a formal introduction would be a good way to start off episode 1 of the Say No More podcast, do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
The main goal, I think, of why we started having this discussion about wanting to do a podcast is for that education, through also learning through each other, because I think it's important that SSD peers are connecting and having these conversations, but also having conversations with guests and people who can contribute to our knowledge to be able to get that knowledge out there. The amount of stories that I have where, when you're really engrossed in this world, like you and I are, sometimes you forget that not everybody is on the same page of understanding some of this up-to-date information. And to my knowledge as well, I don't see many podcasts that are really focusing on that and getting this information out at a level that people can understand, no matter like what background they're coming from. And I think that's really important for what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and I see even the podcasts that do try to platform people within providing knowledge and information around substances and harm reduction, and really a lot of the topics that we're going to dive into, they keep it towards one perspective. And that's something I'm really excited to do more too, is just maybe we'll have debates on this podcast where the guests go back and forth with each other and we're like, okay, calm down. Everyone has the right to their own opinions, and if yours is being challenged, you should respect that, and maybe you're wrong, so acknowledge that too. But I think that this podcast is going to provide a lot of opportunities for SSD peers to increase their reach and get more exposure for their chapters, because there's a lot of different chapters that are doing some great things. Specifically, the Rowan University chapter, they just won the Reformer of the Year award at the New Jersey Cannabis Awards, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. And seeing a student organization specifically winning that award just speaks volumes on youth involvement and engagement in the current landscape. And so, kind of getting into knowing a little bit more about us, how did you pick your degree, and were you interested in cannabis and drugs in general, like freshman year or even in high school, or what got you into this space?
For a little bit of a background on me, I always say to people that I have been a scientist since I was probably around 3 years old. My dad is a chemist. I grew up in the lab with him doing these little fake experiments, probably just with water that he would let me do, and like with the mag mix. So it really felt like I was doing something productive. But I grew up in such a rich scientific environment because of my dad. And then my mom, on the other hand, my mom has worked in television for a very long time. So I've had this perfect storm of science and then also communication skills, which, listen, I love my scientists, my fellow scientists. Not all of us are good at talking to people. A lot of us prefer to be the scientists that are alone in the lab all day. I mean, it's kind of hard to find a scientist that wants to talk to people about stuff. So having that combination of those influences from my parents really, I feel, set me up for doing exactly what I'm doing now. I went to a high school in Florida, this huge public high school that was a magnet program for medicine. So I graduated high school with my Florida certification for EMS. I did a lot of clinical work. I knew I wanted to do something in science. And I'm curious about this with you too, the interest in drugs came a little bit later. I feel like that started for me in college. How about you?
I got interested in it like probably sophomore year of high school. Specifically, so a little bit of background on me. I was just a nonstop athlete, and I was playing like 7 sports when I was in 9, 10, and 11 years old, and just always had a drive to kind of like contribute to a team and be part of a community. And so I ended up having some nerve damage in my back during football season and got recommended to take medical cannabis. And when I realized that cannabis isn't just a recreational substance that people use to take to get intoxicated, I kind of explored more. And so I found that MDMA, specifically the studies that MAPS was doing, where I believe they were in phase 2 clinical trials around, oh gosh, like 2018. That might be the wrong time period, but when I was in my freshman and sophomore year in high school, I started to look more into the research that was being done on MDMA specifically, but then more controlled substances that were in Schedule 1. And I realized there is some medical value here. And, you know, every student has their own personal experience and diving into that. But I always knew that I was interested in kind of fighting for this drug war, or against the drug war, I guess is a better way to put it. And so I ended up, as a medical patient in Minnesota, I was paying 400 something a year just to have the card. And then I was also paying over $100 per 1 gram distillate cartridge. And I realized this is not sustainable. I'm not going to be able to pay for this. And I started growing illegally in my closet in my house. And my parents didn't know about it. And I was still in sports. But as a lot of kids do to try and make money, they were helping their friends out and just, getting little bits sold here and there. And I ended up getting my dad's house raided because of that at 17, when
Really?
there were 4 different departments that, the like big battering ram, they
Yes.
like they knocked the whole door in. And so that was terrible and an extreme experience. But I decided, or well, I was facing 10 years in prison after that because it was illegal to grow and possess flower specifically, even as a medical patient, flower wasn't within the program. So I was facing 10 years in prison, and thankfully I'm privileged enough to have had the aid from my parents to pay for a good lawyer and paid them back. But throughout my time on probation, I didn't lose the passion for wanting to fight against the drug war. And so I was trying to figure out where I really wanted to get involved, which ended up being the cannabis industry, because I naturally felt an entrepreneurial path was also right for me. And so while on probation, I told my PO that I was going to tour a college in Michigan because I was interested in going to school for cannabis. And that didn't go over too well, but he allowed it to happen because it was an actual program. And I decided on this school specifically because it had both the cannabis business bachelor's and the cannabis chemistry bachelor's. And so I thought it was important to have a chemistry background while pursuing the business work. And that's how I ended up here.
This is fascinating because you've never told me this full story, and now I'm thinking of so many things. How does it feel to have gone from getting your house literally raided from you growing in your closet to now being able to do it legally for school in your lab?
It's crazy because, like, I don't know if you've seen my stories, but we're growing in class. Like, for our lab, we did tissue culture the other week, and we've had a plant going all semester. And it was weird right away too, because Michigan had already legalized cannabis. So when I came up here to tour, my parents were hitting the dispo, and like they were getting the weed. And so I thought that that was just like a weird balance, because I knew when I was going back to Minnesota, I was still going to be viewed as a druggie. And now I look back on it as probably the best thing that happened to me, because I could have probably pursued an illicit path to get into the industry, but this was one of the only legal options, because I was only, I turned 18 a month after I got raided. So that was a whole complexity in and of itself. But with that, I think it's really strong that I was able to get all the charges dropped too. And so now I was able to leave Minnesota and leave everything behind me and use this as like a second chance, essentially. And yeah.
Wow, dude. I didn't know so much of this. That's so interesting. It makes your life make so much more sense to me now. I feel it. Your passion has always, like, I understand people, sometimes people just have a natural passion for things and I don't question it and it comes from nowhere. But wow, yours definitely comes from somewhere. And that's such an interesting experience. That's also a whole conversation of, you were a minor at the time. This is how extreme that we're treating children, essentially, for something like this. And then you go on to pursue it in a formal academic way. You're doing the exact same thing, except in one situation, you and your family are probably traumatized from a situation like that, and now you just get to go put on a lab coat and walk in the lab for class every day, doing what you did however many years ago that caused such an extreme outcome. That's ridiculous to me.
It is crazy. And a little added caveat to that is also, like, when they raided me, I ran because I knew that I was going to get screwed with the plants in my room. So as I was running, the school resource officer was one of the people leading the investigation. And I had gotten on the ground because they had the biggest guns I'd ever seen in my life at that point. And school resource officer with the gun to the back of my head telling me to shut the fuck up and to basically started questioning me with that intimidation factor. And I follow Pop Brothers at Law, so I know the script of shut up basically and plead the fifth. So I just pled the fifth and asked them for the warrant, and everyone that I was with was sat around the table, like our dinner table, and just read over the warrant. But yeah, it was really unfortunate, and it was really difficult to navigate because I ended up just being on house arrest for 2 months, and then it was during COVID too, so I had the option whether I wanted to go back to school or not for my senior year. And I was like, absolutely not, and I will just go online and will finish out. And it was like when everyone else around me was also planning for their future, and I was so involved with sports, like I had been in talks with colleges for going to college for sports, that was just completely out the window. And it was difficult to watch other people commit and to like see them kind of move on or like plan their next steps. And I was like, well, I have two paths. I'm either like at the point I was interested in going for a cardiologist and specifically going to med school, or I was going to be in prison for 10 years. And so it was really just kind of a waiting game, and that's another whole issue with the system in and of itself. But yeah, I mean, kind of moving on from that story and moving towards where I ended up in college, I getting into college, I had just gotten off probation, and so everyone's like, "Oh, what did you do in high school?" Like all this stuff, and I'm like, "Well, I just got off 13 months probation because I was raided and facing 10 years." And they're like, "Oh, so you know where to get drugs." And that was just really unfortunate because it was hard to make friends because I was trying to remove myself from that life essentially and just kind of isolated a little bit. But that was again also a good thing for me because I isolated on my studies, and through that I fell in love with the chemistry aspect of it that I didn't have as strong of a love for in high school, but more of the advocacy in high school and looking into the research but not really understanding it. And with the degree paths, I was rushed through the Canna-Chem degree a little bit sooner because my advisor encouraged me to drop the cannabis business degree every time I went into her office. But I stretched it out because I knew that there was going to be changes in the near future. So I have taken only like 2 or 3 cannabis chemistry courses in the last 2 years because of that, and it's been mostly cannabis business. But I was able to do an internship at the Department of Agriculture in their chemistry and toxicology unit in Minnesota, and helped them set up the cannabinoid profiling and potency method development and verification. And no one really knew what they were doing there, so they just kind of gave me the reins to it. But it was like exactly 5 years from the date of the date of my raid when I was in that lab and like using cannabis in the lab of a government agency, and I thought that was just absurd. But so I'm going to flip it back on you now, and I'm wondering, when did you get involved with cannabis research within your neuroscience major?
Mine started when, it was my first semester of college, and I'm a little bit older than you, so that for me was 2019. And I was looking to get involved with research. I knew I was always interested in drugs and in the way that my brain works, where I'm thinking, what is nobody talking about? What do I not hear a lot about? I want to do that. That is what I want to do. I was the one in high school that was interested in aspects of psychology and different kinds of drugs. I didn't know that I wanted to make a full career out of it, but I knew that I was interested in that kind of knowledge. And when I got to Syracuse, I immediately wanted to start doing research in a lab, which is pretty rare. People don't start research within being at college in their first 3 months. They're usually still adjusting. I said, no, I want to go immediately into research. And the main drug that was being researched in the Department of Psychiatry at the time, which is where my program had a lot of overlap, was with cannabis. And I started doing research with CBD and Delta-9 THC immediately in clinical trials. And it actually happened to be the first clinical trial to come out of my university ever in 2019 that was about cannabis, which is a shock. And that made me really think about, wait, I thought this was like the most popular drug ever. I thought cannabis was just, it's the thing. I mean, that's what everybody is using. So many millions of Americans are using it, even over alcohol. Why is this not more widely studied? And you would be surprised, people don't really study cannabis, especially in the ways that I've studied it. People just don't research it in that way. I got involved there and I just went down such a rabbit hole. And then the last 6 years of my life have been dedicated to cannabis research. And I've done clinical studies with cannabis. I've done adolescent studies, specifically with more of somebody's motivation to use cannabis and how that literally alters the effects of the drug on your psychological outcomes. In the different ways that you use the same drug. Two people can use the same drug in completely different contexts and experience it totally differently. That set and setting, but with cannabis, I think is very interesting. And then for my master's, I knew I was still really interested in cannabis, and I specifically picked a grad program that was doing research with cannabinoids in more of a biochemical framework because I wanted to move away from clinical for a little bit to get some more lab experience. And I ended up doing my master's degree in the laboratory of the woman who discovered the human endocannabinoid system. And ever since then, and even before then, I've just known that cannabis is my favorite drug to research. It's so interesting. It has so many unanswered questions, especially biochemically and how it interacts epigenetically. That was my thesis for my master's. And there's so much potential there that is so understudied. There's not even, unfortunately, there's not currently a lab in my PhD program that's doing anything with cannabis. And hopefully I would like to change that. But the money, unfortunately, is not unfortunately, it's important work. But the money for research is in alcohol and cocaine, interestingly.
That's strange. So with the money being in alcohol and cocaine, is that like specifically trying to negate the use of alcohol and cocaine? Because that's what we've seen with most cannabis research is they're suppressing the medicinal benefits and trying to highlight the negative benefits. I guess I don't really know exactly as much around the funding for those studies. So I guess specifically, I know that there's been a lot of funding around impaired driving. And is that kind of what they're looking in? Or what direction have they been researching for alcohol?
Yeah, not necessarily just with impaired driving, but with alcohol. I think a lot of money goes to alcohol research because it is something that is legal. It is incredibly widely used socially, and it has, with prolonged use of alcohol or alcohol use disorder, there's so many effects to different organ systems that it just spans so many different areas of research that people study alcohol for that reason. Also because it has, a high prevalence of contributing to these other diseases or fatalities, so there's a lot of interest there. With cocaine, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of money to research cocaine because we don't have anything, any medication, any therapy to reduce somebody's cocaine use disorder. And that's the big goal within the cocaine field, is finding a pharmacological agent that can reduce somebody's cocaine use disorder. Why there's so much money in it and why there's still money but nothing has been found is because there are plenty of drugs that can help reduce cocaine use disorder, but they all still possess their own dependence liability. Like amphetamines are an incredible way to reduce somebody's cocaine use, tapering them off of like extended release amphetamines. But the FDA doesn't want to approve a drug to get you off another drug. So it's this scramble, at least with cocaine right now, to try and find something. But I say I don't see that as a problem. If something works, put your money into managing those clinical outcomes for the people who are on an amphetamine instead of just writing that off as an option.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like there, I think the whole treatment system within itself is a problem because abstinence is really the only option that's promoted right now. But getting back into um, your education route, I think having the mentor be the founder of the ECS system in our body is amazing. And I'm wondering, did you develop a personal relationship with her because of your interest in the cannabis research as well, or did it mostly just consist of lab work?
We had a bit of a personal relationship just because at the time I was the only student in her laboratory, and she knew that I was interested in cannabis policy outside of the research setting. It's funny though, because when you talk to some of these scientists, you think that, the woman who discovered the endocannabinoid system would be involved in multiple aspects of cannabis and cannabinoid research. But really, you see a lot of these scientists only thinking about it and viewing it in the context of biochemistry or whatever they're studying, or epigenetics. It's sometimes hard to convince a scientist to think a little bit more broad about the drug that they're studying, especially the more molecular you get with it. So I would try and get her on board with some of these ideas, and, we had a good enough working relationship. But yeah, I think that's a big thing that I'm very passionate about, is getting these scientists to actually think about the drugs that they're studying in the context outside of the laboratory, because they don't a lot of the time.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder, within your degree path, were you working with raw plant material throughout your time, or was it mainly just isolated cannabinoids? Because based on what you said with the clinical research, I'm assuming you also had to receive approval for them too. So what was that process like? And as a freshman in college, like, were you writing your own applications too?
Not any grants or anything or approvals for the DEA. When you're working with cannabis, you have to have a Schedule 1 license. If you're working with even something as simple as Delta 9 at a certain concentration, or some of these synthetic cannabinoids. But something that surprises people a lot is I've never worked with plant material in the 6 years that I have been researching cannabis. And it's because we get all of this from the DEA, essentially. All of these drugs come from the DEA because we have a DEA Schedule 1 license. And all of these drugs come completely in solution with in ethanol, which is very funny, at very low concentrations. And you still have to jump through all of these hoops to get cannabinoids. I worked on synthetic cannabinoids. You have to jump through all these hoops to get synthetic cannabinoids dissolved in ethanol delivered to you, and it's the tiniest amount ever. And it's enough to do your research, but the whole protocol around obtaining these drugs for research because of being in Schedule 1 is kind of ridiculous. It makes things a lot harder.
Yeah. With the university here, we don't have a Schedule 1 research license, and it was advertised that we do on the website, so it was kind of frustrating to come here and see that, it wasn't true, but that was part of the vote to no confidence. Anywho, we work specifically with hemp too, so I think that just in general, being able to work with the plant material, we've mainly focused on production of the plant in terms of like what potential contaminations there are, and looking at innovations in production and analyzing it. So one of the research projects that I'm working on right now is using laser direct infrared spectroscopy, trying to identify particles throughout the bubble hash and live rosin and hash rosin production process. And we're starting to see a lot of polyamide materials from the nylon bags used in the press process, and we're assuming that the heating and pressure of the bags is actually forcing the nylon to degrade and migrate to the lipophilic matrix of the wax. So it's interesting that we have like similar interests, but also completely different experience and research. And so you had mentioned having clinical research as well as, remind me the other one, was it biology research or what?
More biochemical research.
Okay, yeah. So with that, what research projects did you start getting involved in your freshman year, and then how did that evolve? And plug some of your research papers in too.
Totally. The first project that I got involved with was looking at CBD on pain reactivity in humans. So it was a clinical trial. The main point of that there was to understand with a 4-arm study, essentially, if the effects of CBD are primarily driven by the pharmacological abilities of the drug or the psychological expectancies. And what was interesting here is that we wanted to understand if somebody's preconceived notions about what CBD can do from what they've heard in the media or what they've read, if that has more of a pain relieving ability than the drug itself. So we would do a baseline test where we were doing shock essentially to elicit pain. And we would do shock before we told them what they were getting. And then we would do shock after we gave them one of the 4 arms. So they either got the control, which was just coconut oil. They either got coconut oil and they were told it was CBD. They got CBD, but they were told it was coconut oil. Or they got CBD and they were told it's CBD. And what we found there was that not only do the pharmacological abilities of CBD reduce their pain sensitivity, but also in the group where they were just told that they were getting CBD, that expectancy also of what they understand about what CBD does was reducing their reaction to pain. So it was a very interesting mixed finding there that both the pharmacological and the psychological expectancies of the drug lead to reduced pain outcomes, which I think is super important for moving that into more of a clinical space, because that has implications into what a package says on it. You know, that changes your psychological expectancy of the drug, what the packaging is, what your information is that you know about the drug before you take it is also heavily influencing the drug outcome. And that made me really interested in focusing more on the social context of what I was telling you before of my next study, where I was interested in if adolescents had different psychological outcomes when they were using cannabis alone or they were using it with other people. And it's a very stark difference there between who you're using cannabis with, how that drug is able to really influence so much about your behavior and your expectancies about the drug, just solely dependent on who you're using it with.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. Like, just in general, being able to work with people on like how they are reacting to cannabis and what they're thinking about when they use it, and even when they don't, but they think that they're using it. I just think that's a very unique angle that, what's the word? The placebo effect, you know, it's a real thing, and you just kind of made that very evident. And so when did you realize that you needed to kind of get more involved in a vocal standpoint as a scientist as well?
I think this really started for me when I was doing a lot of this adolescent research during my undergrad, and I was realizing that people who are using cannabis alone had lower outcomes. Like if they start in adolescence just using cannabis by themselves, they have poorer outcomes psychologically for coping. So instead of using cannabis for the original intended purpose, they were beginning to use cannabis to cope. And I was like, well, okay, what's leading people to use cannabis alone? A big problem of why people use cannabis alone is because prohibition is still alive and well. Cannabis is still federally illegal, and you decrease somebody's ability to be able to use cannabis socially out of fear of punishment, of getting in trouble for using cannabis. And that made me really realize that, oh my gosh, if kids are going to use cannabis and they use it more socially, they have better outcomes. They use a more sensible amount of the drug. They use it in a more sensible frequency that fits with more positive outcomes for them. the main thing that's blocking that is prohibition. And when I realized how much that had to do with my research, I was like, okay, we've got to do something about this. And I have a social platform. I post a lot about this stuff. And I just really started posting frequently about this, about the war on drugs, about how prohibition is causing these problems. And then obviously expanded that into other drugs of interest as well. I talk a lot about opioids. I talk a lot about 7-hydroxymetragynine, and just thinking about science, but you have to kind of come out of your science mind as a scientist if you want this to be translational work to help people.
Yeah, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, which is kind of why I ended up pursuing the business degree as well. In addition to just entrepreneurial efforts, I was wanting to be able to relay the messages that people don't really understand about science. And again, I think that's what we're trying to do here, is kind of break it down, break a lot of these complex subjects down to be more easily digestible, as well as showing the different perspectives around them. And I started to realize that I needed to get more involved with advocacy work when we were having issues with our club. And we were able to go to conferences over these last couple of years. During my sophomore year at MJ BizCon, I saw there was an SSDP booth. So that was really how I got further involved with SSDP, is I was just getting on the chapter networking collective calls and engaging with all these different people who were what I viewed as experts, because everyone was doing amazing work. And I was pretty intimidated, to be honest, at first, but I think not being afraid to ask a question is something that more youth should have as a trait, because it's not, you don't look dumb when you're trying to learn. You look like confident in your ability to learn when you ask a question. Even if it's not framed the right way, you kind of develop that wording through your experience. So I encourage people who are listening to this podcast to ask more questions, to challenge the norms. And I think that it's just something that we're going to have more and more of with the polarization of society, and as these disagreements come across multiple different landscapes beyond just drugs and drug policy too. And so with that, I'm wondering, how were you introduced to SSDP?
I have always known a little bit about SSDP, but especially when I was in graduate school, I saw the DEA case, obviously. I was following that pretty closely. And there was DOI research going on at my institution at the time. And that really put the fire under me, where I was like, okay, I need to get involved with this organization. I really need to do something. I want to start a chapter here at my grad school. And I just emailed DeAndre, who was doing a lot of the outreach at the time, had a quick call with DeAndre, and hit the ground running. My first event with SSDP was going to the United Nations in Vienna last year to the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. And I had never been involved in policy before in my life. I thought I was showing up to a scientific conference, essentially. I'm like, well, they're talking about drugs. Of course, they're going to be talking about the science of drugs. And then I sit in on my first side event at the UN, and they're talking about like aviation monitoring to stop drug trafficking. And I'm like, you're not, where's the Western blots? Where's the PCR? You're talking about this drug. You don't even know what this drug is. And that made me realize, I was like, okay, if I can become a translator, this is how I view myself now. If I can become a translator, where if I can sit in on enough of this policy stuff and understand the policy conversation with zero background in policy, I've never even taken a political science class. If I can understand and speak their language and speak the science to them, we may have something that works out here. And SSDP made that happen for me. I know more about policy than I ever thought that I would get involved with, ever. I never imagined this route for myself. But as a scientist, sometimes it's like you kind of realize how essential this is to be involved in these conversations and be able to speak both languages, because it's very, very different worlds. And then with SSDP, I was lucky enough to get a job for them, start working. I'm director of the network now, and I hope to be involved for a very, very long time.
Yeah, me too. And I'm now the vice chair of the board of directors, which is super crazy. I was intimidated on that, honestly, because I was excited to join the board of directors as a member, and then Gina Wenzel reached out and was like, "Oh, you should run for vice chair," and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I guess I'll run around like I kind of have my whole life and try figure it out as I go. But I think the whole SSDP team is really good at supporting students in general and youth that want to learn. And I think like you said, in terms of translating policy and becoming that navigator for people, that's a really strong skill to have in addition to the background with, promotion through social media. I think that that's going to be really a strong avenue for you as an SSDP leader and for chapter reach and trying to get more people to develop chapters at their universities. So what would you say is one of your goals with SSDP over the next couple of years?
I think one of the main goals is to let people know that they can get into this kind of work at any stage with any background, whatever it is, and make that message very clear. So, for example, I got a DM yesterday from somebody on Instagram where they had seen, I had just recently submitted a statement to Congress opposing the bill HR 8000, which was the End the Needless Distribution of 7-OH Act. And I posted just, something about it on my story yesterday. And somebody replied to my story and was like, "This is so cool that you're doing this. If I could go back in time and redo what I majored in for my undergrad, I would want to do what you're doing." And I was like, wait a minute. I didn't major in this in my undergrad. It's SSDP. You can just do it. And I think more people can understand that. Like, it's not too late. I only have degrees in education in science fields, and now I work full time in policy. You can do it. I think that's the main message, is that there's ways to get involved and you don't have to know everything coming in. You do not have to know a thing. I did not know. Somebody one time asked me if I was a constituent or something, and I was like, I have no clue what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
you learn as you go.
Yeah, I think that's a huge message that people kind of misconstrued with the name being Students for Sensible Drug Policy, because while it is student and youth led, it's community involved and community supported. And I think that's something, one of my goals is to increase the number of chapters through universities and through community. And I really like this ambassador first model as well, where they don't have to specifically be a chapter and they don't have to, like, I don't know, if they're not living near a university, they don't have to drive down to a meeting. They can just, attend virtually. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to get involved virtually as well with our different public committees, being the Harm Reduction Committee, the Drug Education Committee, Global Policy, which I'm also the vice chair of, and that's going to be a crazy experience, but I'm super excited to go to Vienna with you next year, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about your experience at Vienna in a future episode. But I think trying to get more people who just aren't sure about it to be comfortable exploring and learning more about it. And yeah, I think with the current state of things, there's not a better time to join. And so, looking at cannabis specifically, since you and I are both so involved in it, we're seeing a lot of different things happening over the last 12 months, 24 months. And specifically, there was a lawsuit that was filed against the Trump administration trying to block the insurance coverage for hemp products. And so I'm very curious to see how that develops, because the judge has since blocked the lawsuit, but getting a little bit more into it, it was our best friends at SAM and 9 other organizations that are anti-cannabis groups, essentially, saying that they violated a few different things within, I believe it was the social, oh gosh, that's definitely not it. But I don't know exactly what they had specifically said they were violating, if you wanted to provide a little bit more information, but the coverage itself was going to be up to $500 worth of hemp products through three different approved um, outlets that were basically good sources for cannabidiol and THC products that were no greater than 0.3% and no greater than 3 milligrams. And it's interesting to see that now we're kind of pushing back on that. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that lawsuit and now the lawsuit being rejected. And there's a lot of things in cannabis that are going back and forth. So what if you can provide more information on the lawsuit, that would be awesome, as well as just kind of where you view the current state of cannabis policy.
To give a little bit of background on these articles here, so this episode also is being filmed in April. So it's our big cannabis month. We have all our cannabis events going on right now. It's a hot thing in the news, obviously. And there is this organization called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, or SAM. The leader, the fearless leader of this organization, is a man named Kevin Sabet. He is he's a big anti-cannabis guy. I think that's fair to say. His whole organization is wanting to prevent marijuana, which that's a whole nother thing. I don't like the term marijuana personally. They want to prevent marijuana from becoming the new big tobacco. They think that this is a pretty much corporate scheme. They want to reduce corporate greed within the cannabis industry. They've been doing a lot. They're very familiar with us at SSDP. Shout out to them. You'll hear a little bit about that maybe at a future episode about the UN and some of the stuff that they were presenting at the UN, because I mean this goes way back of them just having plenty of issues with what we do, with what anybody does who's advocating for decriminalization of cannabis. So this lawsuit that was filed, that was from 9 anti-cannabis groups, the leading one being Smart Approaches to Marijuana, or SAM. They filed a lawsuit against the U.S. District Court for trying to allow, like you said, $500 of coverage a year of hemp products to be covered by Medicare. And the thing that I find funny here is that if you're an anti-cannabis person, this isn't saying that the U.S. District Court wants to introduce tons of prescriptions and create a ton of new prescriptions that you then get money for, or you get an incentive for having this prescription. That's not what we're talking about here at all. This is for people who are patients, pre-existing patients, who utilize these products medically, who are already paying, like we were talking about earlier, already paying a ton of money for the card itself, for the products. And here, all the U.S. District Court is saying is so many people are using this because it is becoming a popular medicine in many states, that maybe we should have coverage, a little bit of coverage for it. $500 also is not a lot. It's not a lot of coverage for something like this.
Not at all. That would have just covered the cost of my card and no medicine at all. So it's very interesting that this is like even being pushed back on, because it's like they did admit that there are FDA approved products for THC and CBD, but then they also mentioned on X that THC causes this, CBD causes this, with no like studies linked or anything. And it's frustrating to say the least. I had read in the article from Marijuana Moment that one of their big donors was going to be personally affected by this ruling, which I think it's a little interesting, because if you're not a cannabis user for medical purposes, how is it going to personally affect you? Like it's not anything to do with you, but it's interesting that you think it's something to do with you. It sounds like, a me show essentially, and we can kind of diverge from the shitting on them, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity for them if they just admit that there's some better approaches than the ones that they're approaching, which are strictly prohibition, because, like I said, there's proven medicinal benefits, and the representative AOC specifically is starting to challenge the Controlled Substance
Mm-hmm.
Act because, you know, we have proven medicinal value in a lot of the Schedule 1 substances. And so lots of changes and discussion to be had around what's going on within the current landscape of drugs in general, specifically ones in the Controlled Substance Act, but also like tobacco and nicotine, and also like alcohol, like you said, there's a lot of studies being done on that. But what was the judge's current ruling for the lawsuit?
So they acted pretty fast. Within, I want to say, like 24 to 48 hours, the judge immediately rejected this motion. It's a little bit confusing, maybe if you're reading this without like the full context, but the original suit was to file a temporary restraining order, which you don't think is something that is like against a proposal of like a bill for Medicare coverage. You usually think of that like in other ways, but they were trying to put in a restraining order pretty much to push this off from happening. And the judge was like, no, his exact quote was, "This is an extraordinarily drastic remedy to like do, this is way too insane to file something like this when this is still in talks, this is still in consideration, it's something that's being proposed." So it was blocked, and I believe that it's going to a hearing, and the hearing ironically is set for 420. We'll see what the outcome is. I don't think that they're going to be successful in this. I'm sorry. I don't think that this is something that people are really gonna, it doesn't make you look good. I don't think it makes you look good because it doesn't send an anti-cannabis message. It sounds like an anti-patient message.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing to take away from this is they're trying to restrict coverage for people who are already taking it. It's not like it's going to increase access, it's just going to reduce the burden on the patients. And I think that's probably the outcome that we'll end up seeing, whether it be, hopefully the final ruling is on 420, because that would be just another celebration to add to the day. But I'm wondering, based on how things are kind of going with rescheduling discussion, and now there's word from a senior advisor in the Trump admin that they're forming a descheduling committee over the summer, and the FDA also never listed their synthetic and intoxicating cannabinoids that were going to be banned in November. And so there's a lot of things that we're waiting on, and we're just kind of keeping a close eye on. But no one really knows what's going to happen either. So we're just kind of floating by, coasting by, doing what we can with what we've always done. And all we can do is just continue to be vocal, email the reps when bills come out, and just, participating in the 420 congressional briefing with SSDP, which will be in DC, and engaging with these people directly to talk about decriminalizing cannabis. And we also have a Cannabis Week of Unity, May 12th and May 13th, I believe, in DC. And there will be SSDP and a lot of other organizations gathering for Lobbying Day. I highly encourage you to get more involved with that week by going to SSDP's website. And I believe there's a sign-up form on there. And if there's not, there's definitely a email that you can reach out to that we can give you more information on and include you within that group. And are you going to be in DC this year?
No, I'm so sad I'm missing it.
Oh no. Well, next year maybe. But I'm not going to be at the 420 congressional briefing, but I'll probably be at the Cannabis Week of Unity. But yeah, I'm excited. I actually have not performed a lobbying day before, so I really have no idea what to expect. I need to get a script together and prepare a little bit more, but I'm really excited.
Well, the best part about SSDP and what we do is that there's going to be the lobbying training before you guys actually go out there.
Yeah.
So, because also, like, I don't know if I would know exactly what to do. I feel like maybe I could figure it out, but it may not be great. And with SSDP, that's what's awesome, is that we really equipped people to be able to perform well and be confident in what they're doing. Because also, I mean, it's typically not normal for a young person to know how to lobby, unless like you've dedicated your whole life to kind of that field of interest, I guess. So we catch you up to speed, which I think is pretty great.
Yeah, that'll be very helpful the day before and a little bit of preparation in advance as well. But I think this is a good time to kind of wrap things up as well. And I'm wondering what's the best way that people can reach you if they're looking to kind of keep following the research that you're doing and learn more about all these awesome statements that you're giving at the UN and in Congress.
If you're interested in my work personally, my LinkedIn is just, you can find me at Brooke Shockey Sanders. My Instagram handle is Shockey Sanders. Also follow SSDP Official on Instagram. That's our tag pretty much for every social media platform. And for our podcast in particular, our Instagram for the podcast is saynomore.ssdp. How about you? Go ahead.
Yeah, my LinkedIn's probably the best way to reach me. It's just Jackson Rund on there. RUND is the last name. And then on Instagram, I am jollygreengiant.420 because I'm 6'5" and I like to smile a lot. So that's kind of the main thing there. But thank you all for listening, and I'm really excited to continue this podcast, provide more opportunities to learn, and help everyone know a little bit more.
Exactly. And with that, we're going to say no more. We're going to go.